Hey, happy Thursday morning to you, everyone, and welcome back to Morning Musings. Great to be with you. Appreciate you being with me. And by the way, I really appreciate all the wonderful comments, both private and public, in response to our study of the Olivet Discourse and on the Great Tribulation and what have you. I hope it's helpful to you. I know, and I correspond with people on a very regular basis who are literally terrified of the future. The dispensational world has so sensationalized the doctrine of the Great Tribulation that people literally live in fear every day of their lives of what's coming in the supposedly near future. And by the way, how many times have we been told? You know, here I am, I'm almost 70 years old. Anyway, I remember at being a very young man in the 50s. And I remember hearing preachers talk about the coming end. It was imminent. It was coming soon. The Great Tribulation was upon us. Let's see. You know, the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, every single decade, same message. We were assured that the Lord was coming in 1975. We were assured that there were 88 reasons why the rapture would be in 1988. Oh, wait, no, 1989. And we were assured, 1980s, countdown to Armageddon. My goodness, the end was near. We were assured. I sat and watched Jack Van Impe predict the end of the world for 1999. Here we are, 2019, and that same mantra keeps being repeated. You know, I have in my files a prediction by an individual who said that next year the end was coming. The rapture was coming without any doubt whatsoever. I have the record of that in my files here. And I have correspondence from people who have sent me emails saying, Don Preston, you're a heretic. I'll guarantee you the rapture, Daniel 9, the Great Tribulation is going to happen. One of them that I remember specifically is going to happen in 2015. When I responded to that individual and I said, look, your prophecy, your prediction is false. This individual had told me, if the Bible is true, the Great Tribulation will begin in 2015. There's no question about it. Well, 2015 came and went. I had, as mentioned, I had emailed him back and I said, your prophecy is false. Please, with all due respect, you're completely overlooking the timeline. So when your prophecy, which was for September and October of 2015, when it didn't come to pass, when the Great Tribulation didn't come to pass, when the rapture did not happen, I contacted him. And I said, if you will remember, I contacted you in response to your email telling you it would not happen, asking you to please correspond with me. And he wrote back, kindly enough, and said, well, you're right, it didn't happen. I'm completely devastated. I thought I had it figured out. I've got to go back and rethink and recalculate. Folks, anytime you take the Great Tribulation out of its historical, biblical context, then you're misusing the Bible. Well, I could get on my soapbox about that. But I want to begin to look at another major prophecy from the Old Testament about the Great Tribulation that puts the Great Tribulation within a given specific framework. Now, we did that yesterday with Daniel chapter 9. Personally, I don't know how we get around Daniel 9. I really don't. People try, but the arguments that they make very often qualify as argumentum ad desperatum. They just don't work. Okay, the next prophecy I want to look at is Daniel chapter 12. Now, make no mistake, Daniel chapter 10 and 11 tell us in the lead up to Daniel chapter 12 about Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes was one bad dude. And by the way, I think he was typological of the events of the first century. I've said that many, many times, and I've never denied that. I've affirmed that. But Antiochus Epiphanes is not the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 9, as I pointed out yesterday. And he cannot be the ultimate fulfillment of Daniel chapter 12. Now, Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 begins at that time. Now, any good student has to say, okay, what's the antecedent? What is at that time? Well, most liberal scholars say, well, that's the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. This is the current view of Sam Frost. So he's saying the time of the Great Tribulation was actually in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. And by the way, Mr. Frost says, when Jesus in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 15 said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let the one who reads understand. Mr. Frost says, Jesus wasn't predicting that the abomination of desolation was spoken of by Daniel the prophet as a prophecy of Jesus' generation. Oh, no, no, no. Daniel was predicting the abomination of desolation by Antiochus Epiphanes, and Jesus was simply telling his apostles, now, when you see what's going to happen, remember what it was like in Daniel's day, or at the time of Antiochus. Not, pardon me, not that Daniel predicted what I'm telling you about. I'm sorry, that just doesn't work. And the great consensus of scholarship, by the way, rejects that view of Mr. Frost. But the question, of course, has to be raised. Now, since Daniel 10 and 11 most assuredly do discuss Antiochus Epiphanes, then does that not prove that Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 refers to the time of Antiochus Epiphanes? No, it doesn't. Because as many, many scholars demonstrate and argue, in Daniel chapter 11, verse 29 and following, we have a transitional situation, a historical transition from focusing primarily on Antiochus Epiphanes to the transition of power from him to the Romans. Now, Daniel 11, 29 and 30. At the appointed time, he, Antiochus Epiphanes, shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him, therefore he shall rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Now, here's the historical background for what happened in fulfillment of these verses. Here's the historical fulfillment. Antiochus Epiphanes had set himself to go and to invade Egypt. He had gone to Alexandria in Egypt and was getting ready to launch an all-out invasion of Egypt. Well, you see, that meant that it would involve the Romans, because the Romans got their wheat from Egypt. So the Romans sent a guy by the name of Gaius Popilius, a former senator who, by the way, had been raised up with Antiochus Epiphanes. They knew each other. They were raised together in Rome, trained in Rome. But now Gaius Popilius is a Roman general. And so the Roman Senate sends Gaius Popilius to Alexandria with the Roman army. And Gaius Popilius meets Antiochus Epiphanes on the sands of the sea at Alexandria. And he tells him, if you invade Egypt, Rome is coming to war with you. Now look, Antiochus Epiphanes was not a dummy. He knew that Rome was on the ascendancy. He knew that Rome was undefeated in battle. He knew that Rome had incredible military might. But now he's on the spot. He's been rampaging through the entire region, conquering city after city after city. Now he wants to take Egypt and her wealth. And here stand the Romans in his way. Will Antiochus continue to be on the ascendancy, or will it be Rome? Here they stand, face to face, on the shores of the sea. And pious Popilius gives him an ultimatum. You either withdraw or go to war with Rome. And Antiochus thought about it, trying to be very diplomatic, trying to avoid the moment. He said, well, give me a little bit of time to think about it. And Gaius Popilius took his staff and drew a circle around Antiochus Epiphanes in the sand. And he said, make up your mind before you leave the circle. Wow, what a moment. Antiochus withdrew. Oh, and by the way, the text here says that he shall be enraged against the holy people. He left the shores of Egypt, went back to the land of Israel, and he desecrated the temple. He didn't destroy the city and the sanctuary, but he raged against it. In other words, as many, many scholars have pointed out, from this point forward, while Antiochus Epiphanes may be mentioned, he is not the key player. He is no longer the dominant power. He is no longer the time under consideration. Now, the time under consideration is the time of Rome, who has just, they have embarrassed Antiochus. Now, Rome is the ascendant power. And again, that doesn't mean Antiochus won't be mentioned. No, that's not what the scholars suggest. But what they say is, from the moment of Daniel chapter 11, 29 and 30, the focus of power, the focus of the last days, the focus of the appointed time shifts from Antiochus Epiphanes to the days of Rome and her ascendancy. Thus, in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, at that time, at what time? In the days of Rome, there shall be a time of great tribulation. That agrees perfectly with Daniel 9 and the destruction of the city within the 70 weeks. And folks, that has incredible implications for eschatology. That's all the time I have time for today. Let me recommend that you get a copy of my book, The Resurrection of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 2, Fulfilled or Future, in which I discuss this entire scenario, and I cite the scholarship, and I document for you that Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, when it says at that time, is referring to the days of Rome and the Jewish war. All right? Well, thank you so much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. Now, tomorrow, I will continue my examination of Sam Frost and his book, The Parousia of the Son of Man. You don't want to miss that, okay? because we're going to build on Sam Frost's comments that Christ was the first fruit. Well, he was the first fruit of what? The harvest. When was the harvest to take place? You know what? The Bible is more than clear about that. So you don't want to miss it. I'll see you on the flip side.